So my background with irrigation, I grew up in it. I guess on the property, on the ranch that we have up there in Los Ojos, I'm third generation. So my grandfather, he was the mayordomo of the Parkview ditch for around 30 years. And then my dad became the mayordomo for 30 some years. And then, you know, when he was kind of done with it, I took over. I was mayordomo for 9 years. And then I moved over here to the office of the state engineer. But I ran that ranch with my dad for about 20 some years. I mean, subtracting when I was a little kid. So I've pretty much always been into water rights just because it's a really important thing, especially up in the north where that's where you make your living. The main duty of the mayordomo is to make sure that there is plenty of water for the parciantes and also that the acequia itself is in good shape. Make sure that there's no beaver dams. So usually in the early spring, I'd go walk the entire length of the acequia to make sure that there's no beaver dams, no breaks, and there's no water coming out. Just make sure everything is in good working order, and then make sure that, you know, that everybody has a chance to get water, and, you know, also make sure nobody's breaking the rules. Up there in the Chama area, I'd say, you know, 90 plus percent of the irrigation is geared towards hay production, either horse hay or cow hay. And the majority of it is grass hay, as opposed to in the lower Chama you get, the majority is alfalfa. I think I only know of a couple of fields that aren't growing alfalfa. So yeah, it's all hay production. Everybody's got a herd of cows, or they're just selling to people that have cows. The hay that we produced was Timothy hay, which is geared more towards horses. I think it does give me an advantage because as a former mayordomo and a farmer myself, I can easily put myself in the shoes of the irrigators that I'm, you know, managing. So I know, like, if you look at the schedule, they've got like 3 days on, 4 days off. I know it's really hard those 4 days that are off because, you know, you get to the 4th day and you're seeing everything dry up. So one of the things that we have available or the ability to do is, if we have a little bit of excess water, I can always go and apportion that water out to some of the ditches that I know are hurting for water. They're at the end of their 4 days and they're needing a bit of water. And so I can call them up and say, hey, we got 2-3 CFS, you guys go ahead and take it so you can start getting your fields. And then you also have to charge the ditches. So you have to get the water from one end to the other. And that's one of the issues with former sharing agreements, was there wasn't enough time to get the water from one end of the ditch to the other just to fill up the ditch. And then at that point they can start irrigating. So when we had a different schedule, there were some groups that barely had enough time to get the water to the end of the ditch and not enough time to actually start irrigating. So I keep a lot of those things in mind because I know how it is when you're trying to get water to the end of the ditch and it takes, you know, 24 plus hours to get from the head gate all the way to the end. So you know that who's irrigating. If they're at the end of the ditch, you know that you need to make sure that they start charging up that ditch a little bit early. So I can take that into account and give them a call and say, hey, you guys go ahead and start putting water in your ditch. That way when it's their turn, the ditch is already charged and full, and the guys throughout the whole stretch of the ditch can irrigate when their time comes. So a lot of the activities that I do during the shortage sharing agreement, so I guess my day usually starts with, I have a list of all the mayordomos of every ditch from Abiquiu to the confluence of the Rio Grande and the Rio Chama, and I call every single one of them every single day pretty much when we're in curtailment, and I'll tell them, you know, what their available water is for the next day. And then I also will call, if we have some extra water, I'll call some of the other people that I know that might need it, and it's up to my judgment. And so I call them, I let them know, And then after that, I'm also monitoring. We have the real-time measuring stations, and we have a website, so I can actually go real time and look at what everybody has. If I see somebody's above their allotment of water, I'll give them a call. I'll say, hey, you guys are a little bit above, you need to get out there and turn it down. And if I see someone's below their allotment, I'll call them and I'll say, hey, you guys can take some more water. Or if there's extra water, I'll call around and I'll tell people, hey, can you guys use some extra water, until I fully apportion the total available amount of water. I think it's really important to them. I've gotten a lot of positive feedback. I actually went to high school in Espanola, so there's a lot of the people that I know in that area already that I've known for many years, and they come up and they're really happy that I'm there, because they know that they have someone who has their best interest at heart, actually the one running the system and making sure that everybody has water. And they know that I know how it feels to be hurting for water, and so they're confident in me that I'm going to make the right decisions, and I'm not going to be I guess just a bureaucrat that's out there just making decisions not based on the actual needs of the farmers themselves, me being a farmer myself. Everybody gets their days with water. I guess if you ran it according to the priority system, you know, it might just be a handful of ditches, what we call the senior ditches, that get the water all the time, and everybody would be shut off completely. But then you also would run into the situation, if it was just being ran, if we weren't running it, and if it was just kind of running itself, the people higher up on the river are going to be the people that take the water, and the people at the lower end of the river aren't going to have any left for them. And it just so turns out that a lot of the more senior ditches are at the lower end of the stretch. So that kind of would create an issue where they would not get their water. The seniors would not get their water if we didn't have this shortage sharing agreement, because you would have people at the top. That might lead to a call on the water where we would have to go and shut everybody down just so the seniors would have water. But with the shortage sharing agreement, everybody gets a portion of the water, and they get it for a certain amount of days, at least guaranteed, as opposed to some with all the water and the rest with none of the water. So everybody gets at least some days on, and that's just, of course, dependent on how much water is available, native water. The way it was done in the past was the guys at the upper end of the river, they take what water they want, and whatever is left as you go down. There would be some sort of cooperation probably, because everybody, even though there's about 18 ditches from Abiquiu to the confluence of the Rio Grande, everybody knows each other, and they have to live in the same communities with each other, so you can't really get people that are being too greedy at the upper end of the river, because you're going to have the guys at the lower end of the river showing up at your house saying, hey, you need to let some water go for us. And that also goes between the lower Chama ditches and the upper Chama ditches, because the majority of the water is born in the upper Chama, and the Brazos and the Chama watersheds. So you actually have some cooperation between the lower and the upper, because in the past, you know, you would have probably, once you get down to 100 and below CFS up in the upper, you can actually have those upper Chama ditches take 100% of the water. And so the only thing that would be available for the lower would be, you know, any little arroyos or streams that are coming in from that point down, and that's not a heck of a lot. So in the past, it was pretty much just everybody for themselves, and so you could see how that could create some issues, especially friction between the upper and the lower Chama, because you have the upper Chama where the water is born and they see that water as their water, but law gives the water to whoever has the oldest priority date. So you've got the guys in the lower who actually have the oldest priority dates. They would be shortchanged. So you would have to at least have some communication and agreement just between the two parties. And I think that's not something that is really easy to come by. I think there's some years where probably the lower Chama just ran out of water completely. So this shortage sharing agreement at least makes sure that the upper Chama ditches get their water through kind of July. They have a lower or a shorter growing season. In the upper Chama, it's about 90 days plus or minus, whereas in the lower Chama, they're probably 120, 150 days. So the lower Chama knows that the upper Chama only has so many days in the summer to get their irrigation in. So that's kind of one aspect of the shortage sharing agreement, is that they try and make sure that the upper Chama has water through July. And if they can water to at least the last week of July, they don't really need a water past that, because past that it starts to get cold, starts to freeze, and the grasses themselves start turning into seed, and they start turning yellow, and they start maturing, and the protein and vitamins and everything in the grasses start plummeting from that point. So there's really not much reason to irrigate past July in the upper, whereas in the lower they can irrigate through August and through September, because alfalfa, they'll get, you know, as many cuts as they can, 3, 4, maybe 5 cuts on a really good year. Whereas the upper Chama, you only get 1 cut, but it's grass hay, and you know, the grass hay will get up to 4 or 5 feet tall in that 1 cut. Whereas alfalfa, each cut's probably, you know, 18 inches, like that. And so they can irrigate much longer. So there's that agreement between the two parties where the upper Chama at least gets water through July if it's available. And then past that point, they go to usually stock only water, which is, you know, a few CFS just for keeping the cattle and the horses. And some people actually also have sheep up there. So usually past July, there's not a heck of a lot of water left in the river, so it goes to stock only in the upper, and then whatever's available at La Puente is split between the lower Chama ditches. I think the shortage sharing agreement came out of, like you say, a desire for conflict resolution, because you have to understand that even though there's quite a bit of separation between the upper and the lower, these people are at each other's funerals, they're at each other's quinceañeras, whatever it may be. And so if you've got, you know, groups that are at conflict and they're seeing each other at church or at funerals or this and that, that's when they're going to discuss it. So you have the potential for groups to be at odds at times when you're there to maybe celebrate or whatever the case may be. So you can have friction at times when you definitely don't want it. You're there to be a close-knit community. And then you also have, you know, families that are married with other families in the upper and in the lower. So you get a situation where you really can't have that conflict if you're going to be a community that's working together towards a single goal. So this it really helps solve a lot of that conflict, because you've got rules, you've got someone that's running it, and you know, everybody has to follow the rules, take their right amount of water on the days that they're supposed to, and if they're not, then you have a person, which would be the water master, that can step in and say, hey, you're taking water and you need to shut down, or hey, there's extra water, let's give it to this ditch. So the shortage sharing agreement, you know, it kind of came about because you've got the two groups, the upper Chama and the lower Chama. The upper Chama, the umbrella organization of all those ditches, is the Acequias Norteñas, and then you have the Rio Chama Acequia Association and the lower Chama. These groups, they know each other. They grew up with each other. They played sports with each other. You know, they're at each other's funerals, weddings, all of this. But with there being a separation of, you know, 60, 70 miles, especially back in the day in the 50s, 60s, 70s, when it was really hard to travel that distance. You're only seeing each other whenever there's something in the community that's bringing everybody together. So you can imagine that if there's conflict between the two parties over water, it's going to show up at a time when everybody's there for either celebration or mourning or whatever the case may be. So this kind of at least alleviates those issues so that you've got somebody that's running the system and making sure that people aren't taking more than their fair share when there's a shortage of water, and also making sure that everybody gets at least a portion of the water for a certain amount of days. So these two communities that are kind of really far apart, and there's a whole bunch of little communities in the north, or in the upper and in the lower Chama, but really that whole northern New Mexico is kind of one big community with the little pockets here separated by quite a bit of distance. So they're seeing each other for celebrations or for times of mourning, and so you don't want this kind of friction to show up when you have the community there trying to celebrate something. So this actually helps to make sure that everybody gets their fair share, and you alleviate a lot of that friction, because you don't have people, you know, you're waiting a month, you're stewing, and then finally you see the guy that you know that's been taking the water upstream of you, and you've had a lot of time to think about it, so it can get pretty heated. And in the past it would get violent as well. I know that there was some violence that I can speak to. I know my father, he was shot over water at one point. You know, nowadays, I think I talked about the treasurer earlier that had passed away. He was part of the family where that violence occurred. His brother was the one that shot my father. And they, now, you know, they get along really good. But back in the day when things were, you got to imagine the roads and the vehicles didn't allow people to travel really quick from here to there. So back in the day there was a lot more violence. And you also had the old timers that were really hardcore. They were really, they had a really strong work ethic, and they wouldn't put up with that nonsense. So, and nowadays we at least have that. You know, if they didn't have that water sharing nowadays, we might even have more instances of violence, but more than likely it would be administrative. You know, if they didn't have the shortage sharing agreement, the seniors in the lower, they could go and do a call on the water, and that would mean everybody upstream that's a junior of them would be shut down 100%, and so nobody gets anything except for this small group of people. So this allows everybody to get a little bit. Nobody is upset that these guys that have an older priority date are getting all the water, because the seniors themselves are agreeing to share their water with everybody, because they know that as a community you have to cooperate. Otherwise, you know, if everybody's not getting a little bit of it, the whole community suffers if it's just in the hands of a small group of people. That transparency is really important, because you don't have anybody that's in the dark as to who's got what for how many days. Everybody knows, everybody's got a copy of this, and everybody can also get on the website and see real time what every other ditch is using. You know, sometimes they'll get a call and say, hey, why does this ditch have so much? We do have situations where the measuring station is really close to the first irrigator. So if the first irrigator has boards across the ditch, it makes it look as if this ditch has twice as much water as they really do. So we get those calls and we can say, hey, you know, they actually don't have that much water. The first irrigator is just backing it up. And that type of transparency goes a long way, because you don't have anybody that is sitting there driving by. You know, you drive down the highway and you see how much water is in this ditch or in that ditch, and then you go and you confront them and they're like, why do you have the water? This sharing agreement shows exactly who's supposed to have water and how much and on what days, so everybody knows what everybody else is doing. It gives us the tools to be able to regulate the water in real time. We can go, well, of course, one of the tools with AWORM is that we have stations on every ditch in the lower and the majority of ditches in the upper. So we can actually look real time, see how much is water or how much water everybody has, and we can also see if somebody has too much or too little. It lets us make decisions regarding the diversion of water in real time, as opposed to if we didn't have the measuring stations or those tools that AWORM gives us. You know, we could go out and measure with some of the other tools that we have, but it takes a long time to do that. So it gives us the ability to make changes in real time as opposed to 24 hours later. We can actually do things right when they need to happen, because as you can see with the schedule, some ditches only have water for 2 days. So if there's an issue that we don't get straightened out immediately, 24 or 48 hours goes by, well, that means that there's some ditches that they lose their entire chance to irrigate until the next rotation. So it's really important because it allows us to make those changes as they're needed. I would agree. I think the Chamita ditch kind of claims that they're the oldest acequia in the country, and they have a good argument for it. They're from the 1600s. As we know, Okayawinga, their priority date is time immemorial. They were irrigating, albeit without the acequia system, which was brought by the Spaniards. Who knows how far into the past. But yes, this being the oldest capital and one of the first areas that was actually settled, it stands to reason that these possibly are the oldest acequias in the whole country. Yeah, it really feels like, fulfilling kind of my life's work. Like I said before, I've been a farmer and an irrigator for 30 years. And so it's kind of like I've built up this well of knowledge and ability, so it's nice for me to be able to go out there and use that to help all of these ditches in both communities and all of these communities together, because they really need it. It's hard without having a party that is not, I guess, that doesn't have interest in it. I mean, I kind of do, in that I was a mayordomo of one ditch, but I'm in the lower Chama, and so it feels really good, especially when I have people come up to me and tell me that I've made a really big difference. I did some help on the Chamita ditch that actually helped out a lot of people, and I had a lot of people calling me, or they would see me and they would say, "Oh, thank you so much for what you did." And that actually makes me feel, like all the hard work is worth it, because I really enjoy helping out the community and making sure that everybody has their fair share. The laws help to make sure that this way of life endures. I think one of the issues that we're facing right now is we have a lot of newcomers from different areas that are not party to this culture and how we grew up irrigating and how things are run. I guess outsiders, if you will, that come in and purchase property over here, and they're just not aware of our culture and how things were run. They're aware of how it was where they came from. So there can be some friction from newcomers that come in, purchase property on an acequia, and aren't aware of how things are done, and they start doing things how it was done where they're from. And so that has the potential to change things a lot, because the way that the acequias are governed, the commission and the mayordomo, they're voted in by popular vote. So as we get more people that come in from outside that own water rights on ditches, you can see a situation, and we did have a situation on our ditch where they didn't like how things were done historically and tried to kind of take over the ditch and put themselves in the commission and the mayordomo's job so that they could change the way things were done. But the community rallied, and we kind of defeated that attempt. But I can see how there's the potential for that to be happening across the board in a lot of these acequias. We're getting a lot of people from surrounding states that are moving in, and they're purchasing large chunks of property, and that gives them voting power, because the way that the votes typically happen by statute is you vote your share in the ditch. So which is basically, if you got 1,000 acres on the ditch and you have 100 acres, you vote your 100-acre share. But that's also dependent on which acequia. All acequias do things differently. So some acequias do each parciante, or each landowner or water rights owner gets one vote. But you can see how that vote starts to get watered down if you have, you know, a 100-acre tract that gets split up into 10 10-acre tracts. Now you've got 10 votes where there used to be one. So I foresee that they might start moving a lot more to the other way. Who knows? But you can see how people moving in and wanting to change things has the potential for the way things are done across the whole basin to change in the near future. How much this settlement actually puts things in stone for everybody. So as opposed to, you always have the prospect of, is everything going to remain the same? We have a lot of questions at some of the annual meetings, and they're like, well, how are things going to be done next year? Because we're doing this voluntarily. And the settlement with Okayawinga actually starts to put some of these things in stone so that everybody can know that everything is going to be done this way in perpetuity for, you know, as long as we've still got water here in the Southwest, which it's starting to look less and less likely that we're going to have even the little water resources that we have far into the future. I think, as everybody knows, things are changing with climate change, and we don't know how it's going to be. We could end up with more water than we ever had, or we could end up with less water than we've ever had. A lot of the water that was in the Southwest was apportioned out during a time of excess water. So everybody's apportionment, when it comes back down to normal or low water levels, there's shortage across the board. And we're seeing that now, especially with the San Juan. You're seeing with Colorado, Texas, Arizona. Everybody's realizing that when they divvied up the water, there was a lot more water in the rivers. And now that we're going back to normal or even lower than normal, there's going to have to be some painful cuts. Somebody's going to have to miss out. And I think we see a lot of people saying, you know, maybe this isn't the area to do agriculture, where it's basically a desert. But it's where it's the first place that was settled. It's probably the place in North America, or at least the United States, that this type of agriculture has been done for the longest period of time anywhere. This is historically where agriculture started in this country, at least with the acequia system. So we want to protect it, and we want things like this to give us the tools to protect it for everybody, because a lot of these communities, they rely on the money that they get from agriculture. You know, a lot of people definitely, they have their job that they do Monday through Friday, but this extra money that they get, you know, it helps them get over the hump, I guess. You know, things are getting more expensive, as we all know. So if any of these systems were to stop functioning, it would have a huge impact in the area. So we need to make sure that we have tools like this to make sure that everybody gets their fair share and everybody's at least getting a portion of the water that they require.